Good evening, I'm Kathy Lewis, and here's what matters tonight. 6 Virginia Indian tribes are closer than they've ever been to federal recognition by the government. On this edition of What Matters, we'll introduce you to the Virginia tribes that played such a pivotal and dramatic role when the English settled here, and we'll also explore what federal recognition might mean.
The native people of Virginia are still here. We have survived 400 years of European contact, and actually more than 400 years, because ever since Columbus found America, Europeans have been coming here, so we've even survived for that long. VITAL is an organization working for federal recognition for 6 tribes. And those 6 tribes are the Chickahominy tribe, the Eastern Chickahominy tribe. We have the Monacan, Rappahannock, Nansemond, and then the Upper Mattaponi tribe. We're very hopeful that this year might be the year that we're successful. This marks our 10th year. We started in May of 1999. All indications are that things are very positive this year, and we're very hopeful that this will be the year that we finally get through the process and are officially recognized by the federal government.
Joanne Kimberlin joins us tonight. She's a reporter for the Virginian Pilot, who's been the principal reporter, in fact, the only reporter for a 3-part series in the Pilot about life for today's Indians in Hampton Roads. The chief of the Chickahominy tribe, Steve Adkins, joins us as well, along with the second assistant chief for the Chickahominy and the president of VITAL, known as Virginia Indian Tribal Alliance for Life, Wayne Adkins. Thanks to all of you for being with us today.
Nice to be here.
Really nice to see you. We've talked on the phone several times. I've never had a chance to meet you in person, so I'm delighted to have that opportunity to do so. I wonder, as you look at the series that was in the Pilot, I suppose we have to sort of go back in time a bit as we look at this issue of federal recognition, because it really has its roots so much earlier on than the present day, even earlier than some of the congressional battles around this. What makes it unique for these 6 Indian tribes?
Well, I'm pleased at your insights. You really hit the nail on the head. In 1607, when the settlers landed, they were greeted by upwards of 30 tribes that were sovereign nations. And that relationship continued until what has become the state of Virginia decided that we were to come under their rule. But even then, with the Treaty of 1677, we were defined as sovereign subjects of the Crown. And that relationship has never been terminated by England nor by the Virginia Indians. Of course, in 1776, this thing that we call the American Revolution occurred, but I don't think any of us were signatories to that. And even today, even today, we do enjoy a good relationship with England. And they are really supporting us in our federal recognition effort.
And that's such an interesting distinction, because all of the federal recognition sort of hinges on this business of establishing a relationship to the United States of America, which is really, your situation certainly predates that. So what are the implications of that in this battle?
Well, even to speak to that, we had the dubious distinction today, I guess, of not engaging in warfare with the United States. So there was no reason for a treaty. We never took up arms, so there was not a treaty for us to lay down the arms. So the relationship we had was with the Crown, and that's provided kind of an escape valve for the United States not to recognize us as sovereign nations.
So when we look at these tribes that have achieved recognition, one of the things that they have to do is to establish this linkage, is to demonstrate over a period of 100 years, I think that's what it is, that there is a linkage and that they can demonstrate relationship to the tribe for a period of 100 years.
And that is one of those criteria. And we, in fact, have tribal minutes that go back to at least 1900. So we've got those records where we meet each month, to conduct tribal business. And we have had kind of a a de facto recognition with even Virginia during those years that Plecker tried to annihilate us, because with some of the local officials, they still refer to us as the Chickahominy tribe.
Isn't that interesting? We talk about Plecker. Boy, Plecker is a real key player in this story. So Plecker is the, I think his title has to do with, he's a sort of a vital records person in the Commonwealth.
Right. He was the registrar for the state of Virginia, head of the Bureau of Vital Statistics. I believe he started in 1912 or so.
Right.
About 40 years that he served in that position.
And that's critical, because as we look at this 100-year history, what he did became a major stumbling block in terms of the efforts to create this sort of paper trail back.
That's true. Yeah, essentially, it goes into a lot of detail, I think, but essentially he was working to establish that the white race was superior and that the white race should be kept pure. And he was able, from his position as a registrar, to have legislation drafted and passed called the Racial Integrity Act that basically forbid intermarriage between whites and other people. And so that was the start of it, and it seemed like he almost became fanatical after that, to the point that Indian birth records were modified, because it was in his head that there were no native Indians in Virginia, that anybody that was still in Virginia was of mixed race and therefore could not call themselves Indian.
So he insisted that any Indians be called black. Is that right?
Colored was the term.
Or colored
that was
the
used.
terminology
Right.
of the day.
And essentially, I think it meant all non-whites.
Got
I mean,
it.
there was a white classification, then there was non-whites, and of course,
But this
non-white
creates,
is colored.
and this creates then that break in that paper trail that's so problematic today.
It does, and I think perhaps, I'm definitely not a fan of Plecker, but he spoke to a very receptive audience. The governor embraced it, colleges and universities. So he didn't get a hostile reaction at all to that Racial Integrity Act.
So as you think about this issue of federal recognition, I said at the start of the show that you're closer to this than you've ever been. We should note that the House of Representatives has approved federal recognition, and that has happened before. But you've never been at this moment where you've had as receptive, what you hope is a receptive ear in the Senate.
That's true. Yeah, this seems like the year that we're going to make good progress, and based on all indications, the buzz, if you will, on Capitol Hill, what people are saying, different people that we don't even know, different organizations, they all continue to tell us that it's going to happen for us and soon. And a lot of it is because we have had good hearings in the past. We had a hearing in the Senate last year. We ended on a high note. We seem to have good support from the chairman of the Indian Affairs Committee in the Senate, and so that's always a plus. And just the shift in the demographics, I guess, of the Senate to a more democratic balance, I guess, or more Democrats. To us, this is a nonpartisan issue. It shouldn't be along party lines, but quite often it does come down along party lines.
And I know there's a lot of conversation around federal recognition that has to do with prospective federal benefits. But you've noted, Chief, that for you it's very much more about pride and identity.
It's a matter of pride. It's acknowledging we are who we say we are. It's acknowledging that in 1607 we were a sovereign nation, and that hasn't changed. So there would be probably some educational benefits, but the driver has been ego, pride, recognizing these native tribes to be the sovereign entities that they were then and that we are today.
It's interesting. I was doing some research for this commentary that comes at the end of this broadcast and has to do with the Indian boarding school movement. And I know that I don't think many members of your tribe were involved in that, if I'm not mistaken. But the whole concept of that movement and the idea of taking children from their families and putting them in these boarding schools, and really essentially it sounds like stripping them of everything that was familiar, everything that was sacred, everything that was part of their tradition and their family values and culturally significant. It's really hard to underestimate, I think, the impact of the concept of that.
It really is, and to live it as we did, you can really start to appreciate it. While we weren't in the boarding schools that you talked about, kids left Charles City, Virginia, to go to the 8th grade to school in Oklahoma. and they went to Oklahoma.
Why did they do that?
There were no schools in Virginia for Indians. So we went to a school called Bacone College in Oklahoma. Some kids went to Michigan, some went to North Carolina, some went to Florida. And we'd leave in the fall and come back in the spring. So kids 13 years old leaving home and not being back for a year.
And when they came back after that long period of time, what happened?
Well, some didn't come back. Some of our family members, the younger kids didn't meet their older siblings until they were in their 20s. They left and didn't come back. They went into the service. They served their country, never came back home. Chickahominy, we have done more of coming back home and entering the professions, doctors, lawyers, truck drivers, ditch diggers, all those things. But we've come back and we've become a part of mainstream America, mainstream society. But we walk in two worlds because we also maintain our cultural identity. We think it's very important to do that.
How do you do that? How do you go about that walk in two worlds?
Well, as Joanne's article pointed out, the dance practice that occurs at the Tribal Center, at the Chickahominy Tribal Center on Thursday evenings, that's a way of reconnecting our kids to their heritage. And we have classes on Saturdays. We haven't had this for a couple of years now, but we're starting them again, where we teach kids oral history. We teach them leatherwork, beadwork, but we really teach them the history of their contributions since European contact in 1607, because there's such a dearth of information in the textbooks.
And in fact, there was an error in the SOLs that you were successful in getting them to take a look at in the standards of learning tests.
That's right. People will paint with a wide brush. Within the Sioux Nation, there are many different tribes. Lakota, for instance. So if you approach a person who's Lakota, don't call that person Sioux. Call them Lakota. Within the Algonquin Nation, there are many tribes. Chickahominy, Upper Mattaponi, Pamunkey. I'm Chickahominy. Right. So speak to me relative to my nation versus the whole group of tribes.
Really interesting. These are some of the issues that Joanne Kimberlin explored so terrifically well in this three-part series. Joanne, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
How did you get interested in doing this this series?
I had actually done a small story on a native name that was slapped on a subdivision in Virginia Beach many years ago. And it led to the folks at the Virginia Council on Indians sent me a little guideline for writing about Virginia natives.
Yes.
Different things, what to say, what not to say, avoid stereotypes like, throbbing drum beat,
yes.
Things like that. And and I just found it very interesting. Prior to that, did not know there was a Virginia Council on Indians. I didn't know anyone had bothered to put together, such a media guide for people like me, who, in my profession, you step into a world for a little while, and there's a huge learning curve in many cases, and so you can make some pretty big gaffes without meaning to, and I think that's often
naive offenses. Yeah.
Right, and I think that's often the issue when folks are dealing with Native Americans. Like you were just saying about the Lakota Sioux, people want to say Sioux because it's a recognizable. It's like people want to call me an American versus a Virginian versus a Norfolkian. As you drill down like that, and it's often that sort of thing, the naive kind of offenses.
So you explored it that way.
Yeah,
What did you find out about the experience of particularly younger people of being Indian today in this region?
One of the things, to back up just a little bit, when I received that guideline, the guide manual, I talked to a few people, and just outsiders, non-natives, and mentioned something about Virginia Indians, and so many of them said, "We have Indians in Virginia."
Yeah.
And they would say, "Oh, I went to school around here. We were taught that the Indians were all gone," and that came back to me so many times that I really wanted to explore it, more. And I found it very interesting, people. And as far as the young people go, there was this really neat. They're typical young people in so many ways. Recognize my own daughter in them. I mean, they're just they're the age they're at. But there's one thing that really struck me at the Chickahominy Tribal Center that I wrote about. This walking in two worlds. These kids really do that more than ever, and more than any generation before them, I would think. It seems to. They pull up, into the tribal center for this traditional dance night. There's rap music going in the pickup truck. The windows are pounding. The bass is going. They climb out of the truck and they're in their jeans and their hoodies, and I mean they just look like any teenager anywhere. And then they walk inside the door and they start doing this ancient dance that you can tell they're so proud. They talk about their regalia in a way that there was just such a deep sense of importance for them that really struck me as unusual in today's teenagers.
Sure. And we talked about this sense of pride, which is such a critically important piece of this federal recognition. But there are also benefits that would come from that, education benefits, some economic development benefits, and that sort of thing. What else comes with federal recognition?
Well, one of the things I've heard a number of natives talk about is the ability to reclaim their ancestors' bones. That is pretty standard inventory in a lot of museums and institutions across the country. And if you're a federally recognized tribe, these institutions, I think, have to deal with you in a way that they don't.
What's the significance of that piece for you?
There's a Native American Grave Protection Repatriation Act that refers only to federally recognized tribes.
I see.
And we know that there are remains of indigenous Virginia Indians stored at the Smithsonian.
Really?
But we're precluded from obtaining those because of what Joanne just lifted up.
And culturally, that's
very
significant.
We need to bring the remains home.
And I know that this is not your favorite topic to discuss, and I understand that, but we must discuss. We must deal with the issue that this legislation that's moving through. There was some concern that people had about the prospect of gambling and casinos in Virginia should this federal recognition occur. And in fact, the rule that passed the House precludes you from participating in that.
That's true. Now, our gripe with that is simply that sovereignty is sovereignty. And if you start whittling away, then you don't have sovereignty. So full sovereignty says we should have access to all the things that any federally recognized tribe has. And we didn't want to give up something that would set a precedent for those folks who wanted to gain. At the end of the day, we don't want to gain, but we would like to have unqualified sovereignty.
That didn't happen in this bill.
It's been effectively written off.
Yeah.
And there are about 6 other tribes prior to you all, is my understanding from the folks at the BA, who have been asked to do the same thing in other states, 6 other groups. So
Which
it's
is
sort of
interesting,
becoming the thing they're starting to do, I think.
Because if someone came into the Commonwealth and let's say they waved the magic wand and all of this was legal to do, then everybody else would be able to do it, but you would not. I'm talking about the casino piece of it.
That's true. And it's a catch-22. We had folks who would have funded our federal recognition efforts if we would have told them when we would gain. And we said, no, we're not. So we haven't been helped by folks that would have helped us.
So you walked away from funding.
That's right.
Who were those folks?
And Joanne lifted up a point I'd like to speak to about education. For many years, Chickahominy Indians have taken first, second place, valedictorian, salutatorian in the local high school. When the SOLs are published, when all of those metrics that are published around educational achievement, they'll show Latinos, African American, Asians, and other. So even then, the name Indian is not put out there, so the dominant culture continues to perpetuate the myth that we don't exist.
Right.
So it's a constant battle. I was lucky enough to intervene. This time the State Department did break it out, but if you're under a certain threshold as a percentage of population, they aren't constrained to list you separately.
You fall into other.
That's right. And we will typically have 5 out of the top 10 will be natives.
Isn't that
with no press.
Wow, that I can see that's very frustrating. I wonder too, and because I know I'm going to get a letter about this, so I need to ask the question. There was a time frame when we were very careful to use the term Native American as opposed to Indian. I've sort of used them interchangeably this evening. What's your preference?
I'm okay with either. This is something that, again, arose from a dominant culture. They decided what's politically correct without talking to the folks that were affected.
That's what I wondered about. Yeah. So the Native American thing, nobody ever came and said, hey, how does this work for you?
It's my impression that it was something the federal government came up with to put on forms and applications and such.
That's really interesting.
Because to say Native American includes American Indian as well as Native Alaskans. So I think that's
so designation from that perspective.
So it's more than just American Indian.
Yeah.
So.
And we should talk about this issue of naive offense as well, because I mean I committed it right coming into the show. You and I were having a conversation off camera about a person whom I know who always cast his eyes down when he was a student, and he was from the Chippewa tribe, and in that tribal culture, you don't lift your eyes to an elder because it's considered disrespectful. And then I said, I don't mind saying my mistakes, then I said, so they talked to the school once they figured that out and fixed it, he was fine. And you said, oh, interesting use of the word fix it. Completely naive offense, but I take your point. It's such a good one about these.
That's right.
The majority minority culture.
For things that are broken, typically it's broken because the custom of natives, and to fix it, it's to anglicize us.
Exactly.
To make us more like
Right.
them.
Right.
But you bring up another thing, because people of color have been jailed for reckless eye movements, looking at a Caucasian woman walking down the streets. Now this is in the 20th century, where people have been jailed for looking. People of color for looking at a Caucasian woman in the eye. So we kind of speak from both sides of our mouths in this eye contact kind of thing.
Well, it's a great point. So as you think about when you were much younger and you look at today, do you think this issue has progressed? I mean, do you think this House passage of this bill is a sign of progress?
I think it is a sign of progress. My wife accused me of being an eternal optimist. Guilt is charged. Because last year, 2 years ago, I said, I think it'll pass this year.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that this year I have more confidence that the right thing's going to happen. At the end of the day, I'm an American.
Yeah.
And in America, at the end of the day, to be redundant, the right thing ultimately happens.
Well, I certainly wish you well, and I thank you so much for being with us. Chief Atkins, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to following this with great interest. And I'm happy to have a chance to see you again. And Wayne Atkins, I'm happy to meet you for the first time with Vital and the second assistant chief for the Chickahominy tribe. We should have clarified this earlier. You all are cousins and not brothers, just so people know that. That's
right.
I'm sure.
We're brothers in several terms,
That's
but
right.
That's right.
Not necessarily blood.
I gotcha. And Joanne Kimberlin, thank you for this terrific look that you've given us on the Virginian pages of the Virginian Pilot.
My pleasure.
Also available at pilotonline.com. And I'll be back in just a moment with a final thought. The story of what's happened to Native Americans has many sad chapters, and at least one of them took place right here in Hampton Roads. By about 1870, major battles with Indians had died down, and the government concluded it would try to, quote, civilize the Native people so they could take their place in society. After skirmishes in what is now Oklahoma, 72 warriors were taken to a military fort in Florida as prisoners of war by then Lieutenant Richard Pratt. There they were systematically stripped of their native dress, their customs, their language. They were issued military uniforms, taught English, and formed in the Christian faith. Despite several deaths, the experiment was deemed a success, and some of the warriors were sent for more training to Hampton Institute, now called Hampton University. It was founded a few years earlier by Samuel Chapman Armstrong as a school for recently freed slaves. Pratt and Armstrong developed techniques that became the foundation for the Indian school movement. At the core of Pratt's philosophy, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. Armstrong believed that educating the head, the hand, and the heart of the Indians was crucial to the survival of the race. It was a short chapter in Hampton's life on the way to the development of the Carlisle Indian School, the most famous of whose graduates was named Bright Path. At least that was the name he was known by to his mother's Sac and Fox Indian tribe. Bright Path started out at an Indian school in Oklahoma where his brother died of pneumonia, death no stranger in Indian schools. Eventually he came to Carlisle, and legend has it that he passed the track team on the way to class and in street clothes bested them all on the high jump. When Carlisle played Army for the National Collegiate Championship, a future president, Dwight Eisenhower, hurt his knee trying to tackle Bright Path on the football field. You probably know Bright Path better as Olympian Jim Thorpe. one of the most versatile athletes of all time, gold medals in the pentathlon and the decathlon, and a pro football, baseball, and basketball player. But I digress. What I really wanted you to know is that if you're interested in a local connection to the Indian boarding school movement, you might want to visit Hampton University, where you can see not only artifacts from the Indian years at Hampton, but the largest museum collection of works by artists John Biggers, Elizabeth Catlett, and Jacob Lawrence. It's a gem of a museum, the oldest African-American museum in the country, and it's located in the beautiful Huntington building, which used to be the library. Admission is free. They're open every day except Sunday. Learn more at hamptonu.edu or call 727-5308. If you haven't included the Hampton University Museum in your cultural interests, you're really missing something. Magnificent art and a look at moments in time that still reverberate today. Well, whether it is a question or a statement, What Matters is always important to us. Find us online at whatmatters.tv or on Facebook, and we look forward to hearing from you. You can also send your letters to What Matters at 5200 Hampton Boulevard in Norfolk, or call us anytime at 889-9425. In the weeks ahead, the season of storms is upon us. We'll outline the regional evacuation plan. Also coming up, we bring you the stories of 4 individuals and 1 organization, and their work is truly what matters in Hampton Roads. Also in the works, another lively discussion about the issues in the news with our editorial roundtable. Thanks for watching. I'm Kathy Lewis. We'll see you next time for another look at what matters.